Not to say that we weren't very, very young then. Mike and Charlie had a group of us, and we followed part of the Carson and Colorado. This is my husband on the left. He's looking up, why are we out here anyway? And that is this is the right-of-way coming toward Dayton. And we found this original wood culvert. They told me it's very similar to ones that you would see on the Central Pacific. This is what the Dayton station looked like then. It was a private home and right on the corner of US 50. This was a couple years ago when we were all excited that this was going to be restored, and now it's a burned ember, and hopefully they want to reconstruct it. Wabasca had a big tank, and this was probably the little building that housed the pump for it. That is still there. This is what's there about a month ago. And you can see there was a platform for loading. I think this might have been a speeder house, maybe. It's pretty close to the railroad. I don't know. And then, of course, the foundations for the big tank. That's probably a tank that was put in by Southern Pacific. And then the station at Wabasca, the top left photo is taken by Richard Steinheimer in 1972. And I love the snow around it. Currently, that little station sits at the Nevada State Railroad Museum. Schurz is kind of like on the Indian reservation, but you can go visit there. No one will shoot you with arrows or Winchester or anything. You can wander around. This is an overall shot I took. That's the post office back there, and I'm not sure what this structure was or these collapsed ones. There is a rail car here. And believe it or not, one of those old Southern Pacific concrete telephone booths. I'll show you what's back here. Walk back, and there we have another similar foundation for another SP water tank. Hawthorne was actually laid out by the Carson and Colorado. It was going to be a big town for them. And below you see kind of a layout of what was all there. And if you notice, here's the freight depot. Well, this is a more modern photo of Hawthorne. And here's the freight depot. So it's been saved, although somewhat altered, by the Elks Club. You can tell it's the Elks Club, and there's the Elk Crossing. Thorne had at least 2 different stations, depots, and I'm not sure about the, this smaller one looks like the earlier one. I went out looking for Thorne, couldn't find it. I didn't have enough time. Mina became the center point for the railroad when the Southern Pacific purchased it, and they made this their kind of big center. And you can see here we have 3-track throughout the system.
3-rail.
And this is what I saw a few years ago. We think that's the right-of-way there. And I'm not sure, I think we're pointing north, although somebody could probably straighten me out. The roundhouse even had 3-track, as you can see over here. So they didn't have to put the narrow gauge on a flat car and take it to Carson City. These were still there, and I believe the Madam Museums has a couple now that got burned. I'm not sure about that. And this was housing for people, and they were called tin box cars. I'm not sure if that's the right term for them. And there's our leaders, Charlie and Mike.
That's Charlie?
The dynamic duo.
That was in younger years.
Please, everything is younger, you know, let's face it. There's a locomotive passing, whoops, what happened? Oh, come on now, there we go. When I go to use the pointer, I click on something else. And so the top one, you see behind it that interesting roof line. That was the ice house at Mina, and it's been preserved as the volunteer fire department. Some more crumbles in Mina. I didn't go into those because I don't really care for snakes. And some details remaining. I think they get more faded as the years go by, if they're still around. So Sodaville, or Soda Springs as it was once called, was going to be the division point, but through various reasons it never was. There's still some ruins there. They did bottle natural soda, or whatever you want to call it, water. This is Tonopah Junction, and that's where the narrow gauge of the Carson Railroad, which was built because of the big strike in Tonopah, and the little narrow gauge that was Carson and Colorado met. Belleville is, it's kind of hard to see where things were. We wandered around, about 6 of us, and I think this might have been something that has foundations, and I think these are foundations for the water tank. So timetable number 7, effective 1882, goes from Mound House all the way down to Belleville. And that was kind of the first division. They built this, they built a spur into Candelaria. That was important because that was a big mining, silver mining, very old mine area. So here's the spur. And this is it coming around the hill. Now, there is no area left for the depot because of all the mining has moved one hill over behind the town and kind of covered up a lot of things. But this is a historic picture of the depot. It's up on the hill. This is from 1949. I just found this. It's at UC Davis Library. And this photographer used to work for the state and in something else. And this was kind of his hobby, going around and looking at old abandoned places in California and Nevada especially. So this is Candelaria in 1949. These two buildings and that structure are important. Now, I think because they moved the mountain over to the left here, you'll see it's all jammed up against this one building, and Everything else in between has disappeared. So you see what mining operation here has kind of disappeared a lot of things. Brown and Root was the one in 1997 mining. I don't think anyone's mining it right now, but a lot of times they're mining the old tailings. I was told that these woodpecker posts had claims on them. This metal tag tells you who's claimed what. And I don't know, maybe these two lizards are the claimees, I'm not quite sure. This building was a store, and I read on the internet there was a big earthquake in 2020, and this became even more crumbled. So it doesn't look like this anymore. And the same with the bank, which became the post office. These are some buildings that are structures that were partially in the ground. Some of them might have been root cellars or places to keep food. A little cabin. And then this is the foundation for the mill that was there. It had about 30 stamps or so, but it had no water. And the water was so scarce there, so they did it dry, and the air was filled with all this bad stuff and wasn't good for the miners. Well, let's venture down a little bit south. So here we are. There's Schurz and Thorn, and all the way down Tonopah Junction, Candelaria. Then we go to Basalt, Mount Montgomery, which was known, some of these places were known by other names at different times. And then into California, right after Queen. So Carson and Colorado Railroad combined the 1st and 2nd divisions, and that's how we got all the way to Holly, or if you want to call it Keeler now. And that's at the bottom right here. That would be Keeler. So lots of stations, lots of places to stop. But most of this railroad, once it got into Owens Valley, did not go near any of the established towns. They were after mines, and the mines were on the east side. Here's Basalt, and we have the crew about 1925 there. See, it's Southern Pacific. Sorry, guys, Southern Pacific. And very little. This mining operation is the only thing I could find that looked significant. And again, we think some of it was around here, at some of the buildings, and maybe we're close to where I'm standing here. So there's not much left. This is where the railroad got interesting. It actually climbs up to the summit called Mount Montgomery or Sunland. It rose to over 7,000 feet. So one of the ways to get there was this horseshoe curve. So they could, and they usually had to have about 3 locomotives to go up this grade. Once you get up there, then it's all this squiggly line, and right here is the tunnel. And there's still vestiges of that. These were not there when the railroad was there. These were purchased and set aside, and so there's not really anything original. at Montgomery Pass, except the right-of-way. Here you see part of it. And this is the highway. Oh, what is that, 6? Is that right? Okay. And here's the tunnel. We drove back there. I was brave because there were people with me. And we got back there and we walked through it. But this is the other side when the railroad had it early on. And you see snow because it's all pretty high there. And notice this beautiful culvert work. The Chinese did a lot of the building there. This is kind of what it, even today, it kind of looks like this. And the tunnel has caved in the top, but we walked through anyway, up over the debris and out this other side. And there the brave souls are. I have one person taking the picture, of course. I have to say, I'm sorry, that's me. It was spring, and so the wildflowers were out up there. It was really beautiful. Lupin and all kinds of things. As the railroad curved out of the tunnel, it came around this way. And we again saw wood culverts in pretty good shape. Here the railroad is starting its descent toward the valley. That's Mike at the wheel of his VMT RR truck. And Charlie is watching the 2 inches that he has to go around that big boulder. Again, more beautiful rock work. The railroad's up here. I'm wondering if this area right here was not a stop for brake check. Not sure. Okay, so coming downhill around the corner, and the 2 tall mountains you see are Mount Montgomery and Boundary Peak. Right, Boundary Peak is the tallest mountain in Nevada. There they are, and you see the valley rolling out before them. That's where we're going. So Southern Pacific put this out in 1909, and here you see all the ways that you could go and come. And remember, when you're out there, if you see a milepost or you see a milepost in a photograph, historic photograph, it could be confusing because the mileposts first were begun at Mound House, and then later when Southern Pacific had the line, they measured it from their usual San Francisco center. So, and it would be east-west. So even though this is basically a north-south railroad, you're going south, you're really going east, or vice versa. This is a nice map showing rail and stage lines in 1906. And we see the railroad, I marked it in red so I can find it again. And it goes all the way down to Owens Lake and Keeler. And at this point you see dotted lines to Mojave. Well, that changed because standard gauge came in. Just before you cross the Nevada line, there was a station called Queen, and that was for the Queen line, which is not right next to the station. I thought this is a wonderful photo, and you can actually see the locomotive behind here. as well as the iron horses with the animal horses. So I asked this local gentleman, how do I get to Queen Station? And he said, well, just go out to Janie's, turn left, and go down that road. And I said, is it paved? And he said, no. I said, well, what condition is it in? He says, oh, it's smooth. So,
Famous line word.
so this is a Mike Collins smooth road, right? No, it isn't, because you can't really see in this picture, but it tilts about 45 degrees to the right. And you see all these sharp rocks everywhere. So I just went down a little ways, and then I walked a little ways, and I won't walk away from my vehicle. If I can still see it, I'm okay, you know, being by myself. So it's down there somewhere. Queen is yet to be discovered by me. This is a gentleman, Kevin Hickey. This is Benton Hot Springs. I guess I've always been confused about this, because Benton Hot Springs originally was Benton. And then when they built the station, that was Benton Station. And finally, now the maps say Benton Station is Benton, and they call this Benton Hot Springs, and they're about 6 or 8 miles apart. Incidentally, they have all kinds of neat spas here. Be fun to go unwind. There's Benton Station, not quite so lush. Well, I looked through Chalfont and a couple other places. I looked up and down every street, back and forth. I couldn't find anything railroad, but I did find this. So somebody remembers the Slim Princess. I asked Kevin, I said, well, where were the foundations for the station? Well, he said, go back to Benton, that's New Benton. And he said, just turn right at the dump. So I said, oh, that's easy. Well, there's no sign to the dump. And I have to say that everybody in Benton has little precious things in their front yard, and some of us would call it looking like junk. So it was difficult going all the way down. I just finally went to Laws. And there's Mount Tom. This was a couple years ago in the spring. It was really beautiful with snow. There was no snow when I was there a month ago. But there's 3 original stations, no, 2 original stations now left. This one at Laws and one at Keeler from the Carson and Colorado. This was enlarged. Oh, this shows it before it was enlarged. And then the railroad runs right through here and goes back to this, goes north to the milling operation here and some other things they service like Shell and Chevron. That was just a couple years ago. So this gives you an idea. Laws was very, very busy with its railroad. And today they've got more stuff than railroad. They've got all the, they decided that they would have a historic town and they moved all these things in. Not quite, I don't know. Anyway, that's what they decided. We still have the turntable there, the oil tank. This is looking south toward Keeler. You can tell if it's south. No, whoops. Oh, what am I doing wrong here? There we go. Okay, you can tell because on the right-hand side are the Eastern Sierra, and you see the poles. So the railroad right-of-way is usually on the left-hand side like this as you're going south. And then on the other side are the White Mountains and the Inyo. So you keep yourself pretty well oriented that way. This is the tank there, the water tank. And a few years ago they redid it. Not quite so. They didn't really restore it, they just kind of redid it. So it looks a little different. Here's the turntable. They're not going to do anything to the turntable. It's in, quote, arrested decay, whatever that means. And I guess eventually the only ones that'll be able to turn the turntable is right here in the little red circle. That's a little lizard. He thinks he can turn the turntable. This section house is original to Carson, Colorado, I'm told. And the SB 401 narrow gauge caboose was built by Carter Brothers. If you want to know more about that, Kyle is here today. And then I put this in because people ask me about this. The Bodie Railway flat car, number 8, is there at Laws. I don't know who owns it or anything, but they have this nice interpretive sign with it. It was discovered upside down in next to the railroad, just out of Bodie, and they were able to recover it, and they rebuilt with new wood. The Brill motor car a couple of years ago was operational. I don't know if it still is, but it's fun. People can just board it, ride it down to the, about where the tank is and back again, and they don't have to pay an extra fee. It was very nice. These are some of the other things that are at Laws. Of course, the Drover's Cottage was put there by a movie. It was a movie set. The wagons are rebuilt or to various historic specifications, and the water car. So those were the borax wagons. And they're here in Laws because on mule days, there's a man who has a 20-mule team, and he comes and hooks up and takes it in the parade. Pretty cool. It's the 9 a few years ago. Now going south, we're back to my culverts, and these are wooden ones again. They're not quite as in good shape. My friend Bogosin took me out here, and we wandered around for a while. I'm looking north in the photo on the right-hand side because you can see the power poles, or I don't know if they're power, I think they are. And here you see another wood culvert. This is all south of Laws. Okay, well, eventually this railroad was truncated, and it only ran from Laws to Keeler. You see the standard gauge, they called it the SP jawbone line. It came up and met the narrow gauge right here at a place that SP name called Awenyo. And they interchanged materials. It was a desolate railroad down at this end. Eventually, when they operated back and forth, as the water tanks fell down and so forth and removed, they carried an extra water car. I would definitely do that. Then the Little Giant, this brand new little narrow gauge diesel. was purchased, and the whole line was extended for a while into the sunset. Here is Zurich. It was Aalborg, I think. Anyway, we're looking crosswise. This is the railroad here. This is the railroad here. So you have to reorient yourself. I couldn't fit it on the slide otherwise. And you see Blue Star Grinding and the depot and a dump truck ramp. So there's Zurich. After it was renamed from Alford, and here is the ramp for dump trucks. Here's the ramp for the dump trucks. Although the station's gone and a lot of other things, that is still there. Again, you can see I'm shooting toward the south because there are the Sierras on my right. This is the big foundation for that milling plant. And I think this might be part of the stock corrals. I'm not certain. I didn't walk down there. You know, for a little railroad, way out nowhere, the maintenance away people did a superb job. That railroad never looked really tacky. They kept it up.
They were narrow-minded.
They were. Okay, so when LA Water and Power came in, they put in this Tenema reservoir, and this is the one and only time that the railroad crossed water. So they had to go around the reservoir, and there were two crossings, this one at Fish Slough, and then there was another trestle across Owens River. So this is what's left of it on the lower right. I didn't walk across, it looked pretty rickety. It's easy to find, I meant to tell you, it's easy to find. It's real close to 395. You just pull off in this little dirt area and walk, climb the fence and walk over to it. This is Kearsarge. One of the narrow gauge groups did a nice job of putting together some interpretive materials here. So here's part of it. They need to, oh, by the way, guys, if there's anybody here, you need to replace this photo. It's real interesting, but it's getting kind of water stained. You were just talking about mapping. Okay, there's a piece here that has, geological information.
It's a USGS.
Going across the railroad, this goes down out towards some mine. And here you see a dump for a mine. There's all kinds of stuff from mining out here. I'm going to point this feature out right here because we're looking south. And you'll begin to see this in my photos as we get closer to Keeler. But I wanted to tell you this railroad, although it was long and narrow gauge, it also had its problems with weather, and they had snow, and they had flooding. This is actually the original height of the railroad. Look how far they're digging it out. That's at Keeler. About 1945, they had this horrible flood. And the worst thing of all is the sand, the blown-in sand. Here you see that water car there. Yeah. So down in Keeler, there were lots of industry. And I can't tell you who was there when. I'll have to map that out sometime. But the Inyo Development Company was one of the earliest. And they ordered this locomotive, and then the V&T shops in Carson City rebuilt it. It was the Mono on the Bodie and Benton, I think. So it looks really nice here in, I think it was Dayton, this photo was taken. So here's the mill. You see the railroad track, and here's the little engine working. There was a 2-foot gauge that would go over. I think they just pulled the cars over and put them into those dump cars. Well, I walked out there. Well, I drove out so far. I have an acquaintance who lives in Keeler, and she told me, just go on the old highway north of town, and you'll go by the dump. This one had a sign, though. It was easy to see. And I'm looking back now at Keeler, and there's the old remnants of the talc plant there, Sierra Talc. I drove out so far, and I went into this little culvert, and it was full of sand. I started to lose traction. Uh-oh, that's right. I put it in 4-wheel drive and backed out. I was really lucky. Also, I'm glad I didn't go further, because when I walked it, there was all kinds of glass all over. The adventures of following a railroad. These, I think, this is conjecture on my part, are what they call the vats, where they will let the water in, and they settled the water, they drained it, and then what was left, what they called trona. And that's where they got the soda ash. I think this is about where the historic shot I'm going to show you, because I'm thinking these mountains are similar. Mountains don't move too much. So that's a historic shot of these, quote, vats. Keeler says it's got 50 people. They may be right, without counting cats and dogs. And it has no services anymore. I'm not too sure how the post office works. Brian was telling me they just go from Lone Pine for about 4 hours and come back. Those Eastern Sierra are so beautiful here, though. Here's some remnants of Keeler. And here's kind of a schematic of the railroad there in 1950. There was a Y, an end of track. You see the Sierra Talc Company, the depot, and it comes up and it does another division here, and this is the shops. Open air in the desert, 120 degrees out there, and you're working on locomotives or cars. Guys were hardy. This is that historic division. Over to the right is the main line going back toward Oweno and Laws, and on the left is that outdoor shop. This water tank, I'm led to understand, is at Orange Empire, whatever they call that museum now. Somebody will have to write it down for me. This is the way it was about a month ago. This is the main line where this car is parked on it. And this is going toward the shops. This is a sand storage area. I understand they're very important to keep the sand dry. 1970, that's the depot, and there's a ramp on the that'd be the south side, and the railroad ran up on the left-hand side, our left, of the depot. You see it's kind of covered over right now. This is the second original station that's available. That is the Carson, Colorado. The second story was put on it sometime later. And it's also in private hands, so it looks a little tattered right now. The ice house down there. Oh, you're in the desert, you need an ice house. I spend all my time there, really. And then you have probably a speeder building, right here, I'm sorry. And the one up top is the backside of the pump house for that big water tank. So you see they are on either side of the main line as it goes out of town. This car is no longer there. Yeah, it's I think it's a Carter Brothers car, the one on the upper right, and it was sold to the organization down in the Bay Area, and they have it, and I think they have plans for it, to do something with it. Again, it was a tool car for the shops. This is, oops. Boy, it likes to go fast, doesn't it? Maybe I'm talking too slow. Okay, so the one on the lower left is still there. That's a car that was used in the shops. And the lower right, we're looking toward the other mountains toward the east. And you see that sand container. And you see that branch in the railroad right away. It's been there at least 2 years now. Here you see the open air shops in a more historic setting. See? Still there. I looked at this, I looked at the track. There's so few places that you actually see ties, and this is in the shop area. Look at all that stuff that they couldn't get the ties out, which is kind of nice because you look down and you say, that's a lot of work that these people did on this railroad. There's that ramp just below the depot. And then we moved to Sierra Talc and Clay. That used to run in the 50s, but now it's also derelict. This is looking, of course, toward the Sierra. I think this pile of stuff was maybe part of that tramway that ran from Cerro Gordo. I could be wrong. And this was an earth-filled dump truck site for Sierra Talc. This was the end of the line. The roadway I'm looking up right now is called Cerro Gordo Road. I think that tramway was right in here somewhere. There were 2 tramways for it, one earlier and then one later. And I think the later one was actually sold to the mining concerns at Candelaria, and I don't think it was ever, that aerial tramway was ever put up again. I don't know. Well, we just want to skip right through Dolomite, okay. So these ruins were part of the Cerro Gordo works before the first tramway, I understand, and then later on it came right into the town. The natural soda products plant, this is when it was derelict. It had a thrill ride that would equal anything at Six Flags, but It was big. I mean, they had a couple hundred employees, and they had employee housing. They had all kinds of things here. I was amazed, but it's all shut down, and now there's nothing. They came in and bulldozed it. So from Keeler, if you go back north toward Oweno, there's this little side road called the Dolomite Loop. Here's our little piece of the rock, and now we're looking north. There were a number of spurs here. There was Dolomite, Tramway, Aliso, something else. There were 4 or 5 of them. So Dolomite actually, I think, was more than just a siding. I think they had a spur. The trees on the right, it's all fenced in, and it says no, absolutely no trespass. So I believed them, and I didn't go there. And here's Dolomite it was abandoned in this photo. Saline Valley had an aerial tram. I love this because we know all the people's names in this, even the guy in the dump thing. I think that's great. Swansea, I've been told, oh no, they weren't on the railroad. Yes, not this building, but there is at least a sign, maybe a siding that was Swansea. This is a side trip. Thanks to Richard Steinheimer in 1953. Plaster City, it's another desert area, more toward the border with California and Mexico, down that area. They have their own railroad. It's almost 30 miles long, narrow gauge, and their equipment that hauled their little railroad cars needed servicing. So they asked for a locomotive from Southern Pacific, and the 9 was sent down there. So for about 3 months, it worked at Plaster City, bringing material, the ore from the mine, gypsum, down to Plaster City. It's still the largest wallboard manufacturing company in the United States. They still have the railroad. It's still narrow gauge, but they run it all by very modern looking diesels. So going on our way to Oweno, I wanted to point out in Keeler this one particular building that was saved from Oweno, moved here to Keeler for the volunteer fire department. It was the station there. Okay, so now we're out on looking for the narrow gauge again, and I'm on a road called Narrow Gauge Road out of Lone Pine. You see the Sierra on our left, and this is the narrow gauge right away, right here. So Oweno was out, it was going to be the new town, and it never kind of became the new town. However, they had a hotel, and they took the turntable from Keeler, which you see here, and planted it out here. It interchanged with the standard gauge, the jawbone line, and here is the transfer trestle. There is no third rail in this yard. It's all separate. There's that building that's now in Keeler. And these are the crumbles I found out there. I'm looking north now. And I think that hotel was somewhere around where the trees are on the left-hand side. Here is the transfer station trestle, and the narrow gauge was put up on the trestle, while the standard gauge cars will run underneath. You notice this berm too, and it's in my photographs. Okay, there's the remnants of that transfer trestle. The narrow gauge is on the left and the standard gauge is on the right. I put this in because this was just a month ago, and you can see what happens when forest fires goof up your beautiful view of the sky. It's all red and orange. So standard gauge came in this way and down here to be filled with the little narrow gauge cars. This is the beginning of that trestle work. And today, see what I mean about the desert keeps growing a little all the time. It's just 2 years apart, and you can hardly see the front. This isn't that far from that trestle. Here's that outcropping again. And I don't know what these signify, but there were 4 of them, 2 on each side. So there was some type of structure there. Here's that depot again. This was at the end of the line. You can see that the semaphore's gone already. I believe this was where the turntable was. And now we're started back, and there's our right-of-way, and there's our outcropping. But before we leave, I wanted to show you the Lone Pine SP Depot, which is now also privately owned. This is from a photograph by Shirley Berman. And she noticed these Japanese names carved in the siding, kind of back away from things. I looked at it and I saw 1942. So it'd be an interesting story. Manson, or maybe, huh? Yeah, we want to know. So here's the station right there. Isn't that a spectacular spot for railroad? And I'm just totally amazed. Again, this is Dick Steinheimer, 1971. Well, this dog is telling me something. He's waving me off. So we're getting ready to leave. But I just wanted to mention there were 3 locomotives that were donated by the Southern Pacific. And I've never found the age is somewhere. I don't know where.
Sparks.
Well, yeah, but where in Sparks? It's kind of like just go down and turn by the dump. Somebody's going to draw me a map. Okay. So I want to acknowledge there were many more people than these that have helped me along the way, but Jeff Assay, Shirley Berman, Richard Dennison, Ed Bokolson, Dan Keeler, my husband, Dick Steinheimer, Stephen Drew, and Mike Collins, and of course Charlie, but he's not here. The Eastern California Museum and Independence, they are wonderful, they are so nice. The University of Nevada Reno Libraries and the UC Davis Library, Laws Museum, and the California State Railroad Museum Library. So I also want to thank you for your kind attention, and I want to thank those who worked on this railroad, wrote about it, and photographed it. Thank you. Anybody stay awake for a question or two? Okay, good.